Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Finish up on bones today and then move into muscles. Anybody have any questions on anything that doesn't relate to eLearn? And we all know what happened over the weekend with eLearn, and I apologize for that. I was as caught off guard as anybody, so I didn't know that until I started getting frantic emails from everybody. So if, let me know if you had issues and you couldn't get in to take your test, and I can, I'll see what I can do. So did you have, trouble with the test as far as eLearn and getting access to it?
No, I got access to the test. I just noticed that this test.
I will say that this was the worst content. I'm sorry, the hardest content you're going to address throughout the semester. From here on out, everything is going to be better. The content is more interesting, and it's not going to be so, how can I say, out there like it is right now. So
yeah, it was just worded different than what I was used to.
So if you were unable to gain access to eLearn to take your test, let me know, and we can fix that. So, okay, I want to move on and move into wrap up bones here, and let's see. Okay, so we were talking about osteoporosis when we finished up the other day or last week, and osteoporosis is a condition where we're going to go, the osteoclasts are going to go after the spongy bone, dissolve away the spongy bone. It's a very common condition in postmenopausal females because due to the lack of estrogen, and it may or may not affect every postmenopausal female. It usually doesn't. You don't see, about 30% of your postmenopausal females between 60 and 70 are going to have osteoporosis. It climbs to about 70% by the time they're in their 80s. But a lot of that is also just wear and tear too. So it isn't necessarily going to be a something that's going to affect everybody. It has some clinical condition here going on. Now, osteopenia is a precursor, or it may be a precursor to osteoporosis. Osteopenia shows up when bone density is lower than normal. We don't know what the cause is. It may or may not be an indicator that osteoporosis is developing. It may definitely occur through lack of estrogen after menopause. Many older postmenopausal females will be clinically have osteopenia, but they aren't necessarily going to develop osteoporosis. The things that cause osteopenia: your patient doesn't exercise. Your patient drinks excessive amounts of alcohol, smokes a great deal. Also, perhaps they're using they're using their rescue inhaler frequently. Rescue inhaler contains what's known as a glucocorticoid. It is it's a steroid, and this steroid inhibits osteoblast activity. Now, a person that uses their rescue inhaler frequently, what that tells you is that they have their medication is trying to keep their asthma in check. A patient with asthma that's using their rescue inhaler all the time doesn't have their asthma in check with their regular medication, because a rescue inhaler is exactly what it says. It is designed to be used in an emergency. You know, it's not designed to be something that you do 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times a day. You use it when you need it, but not as a constant thing. And so an overuse of the rescue inhaler can often lead to osteopenia because it does interfere with the bone building osteoblast activities. Okay. Something else that happens, this is fairly not unusual, but unique occurrence here. If you have a female athlete, adolescent, young adult, who has almost an obsessive compulsive desire to train for their sport, you know, and I realize that when you compete at an elite level, you know, you're training all the time. However, what often happens is, you know, it isn't just that your female athletes training vigorously or every day for hours at a time, but also they have developed a eating disorder at the same time because they're obsessed about their weight, you know, their weight levels. Are they gaining weight? Are they losing weight? What's their body fat content? Things like this. So a female athlete who is obsessive about training will definitely have a very low body weight, but they will also have a lower fat level. Their body fat index will be much lower. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, except that estrogen is stored in body fat. Now, throw this in with asthma. And statistically, we see that a female athlete has more frequent occurrences of asthma than the non-athlete. So you have a female athlete with very low body weight, very low body fat, high levels, you know, a more frequent occurrence of asthma than others. And what will happen is that their bones will get weaker over time because their estrogen levels are low. They're not storing a lot of estrogen in their body fat, and they are likely using their corticosteroid rescue inhaler more frequently than they should because they're not controlling their asthma properly with their regular medication. And so both of these, low estrogen and corticosteroids, are going to inhibit osteoblast activity. They're not going to lay down a lot of bone, and their bones are going to get weaker. Further, another complication that can occur out of this is their periods will stop because there's not enough estrogen. Yeah, they're not getting the estrogen because they lose their estrogen because of their low body fat. Okay, they don't store a lot of estrogen available, so their ovarian cycle and their uterine cycle stop. No periods. So they have, and now to try and they will likely also have some sort of eating problem too, because to get this situation where their period stops and their body weight is so low and their bone mass is very low, they have to have an eating disorder too, because they're not eating the right foods to keep their bone mass up. They're not getting calcium in their diet. They're not getting enough fat in their diet, you know, so they can store some fats in their adipose tissue and store their estrogen. A person who is obsessive compulsive about their diet will tend to avoid foods that have any kind of fats or carbohydrates in there. And so what will happen is your patient will no longer have a period, have an eating disorder, and they will have significant weight loss and very low body fat. We call it the female athlete triad syndrome. So runners, marathoners, for example, and gymnasts are often afraid to eat dairy products because dairy products may have fat in them, but they also have the calcium they need. And without the calcium, they're not going to have their strong bones. So you may see this occurring. You have to break the chain somewhere in that. So now osteopenia normally shows up as part of the aging process. It is a normal occurrence. Many elderly women, postmenopausal females, have some degree of osteopenia. It does not mean they're going to develop osteoporosis. So now, moving on here. Now, another condition here is osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis is an infection in the bone marrow. You have a penetrating injury to the bone, a fracture, a compound fracture, an open fracture, if you will. Bacteria enter into the bone marrow and find a home. The bacteria grow, and you can see in here, you can see the signs of inflammation and pus formation in here. You can see that the femur is deformed because of all the bacteria, because of the infection going on here. You get bone growth, but it's weak bone development. And this often was fatal prior to the development of antibiotics. Now, what we see now is that a lot of this osteomyelitis is now caused by flesh-eating bacteria, and individuals who fracture their legs and have infection occurring because of penetration of pathogens at the site of the fracture. Many of the bacteria are so virulent and so destructive in nature that they'll destroy the tissues, and your patient will end up having an arm or a leg or a foot or a hand removed because they can't control the bacteria with the existing antibiotics. It was bad enough 50 years ago, 60 years, 70 years ago, when if you had a compound fracture, you might die from it because of the exposure to surface bacteria. But now you may survive it, but you may end up having to have a limb removed. Okay. So another disease that shows up, we've dealt with osteoporosis, we've dealt with rickets and osteomalacia. Osteomyelitis doesn't happen that often, but it seems to be making a comeback thanks to flesh-eating bacteria. We have Paget's disease. This is abnormal bone growth. Now take a look here at this ulna. Look at the growth on the ulna right here. It's malformed growth occurring here. Notice how the radius is sort of jammed in there at the radial tuberosity right there, and how the radius is somewhat deformed. But look at the massive amount of abnormal bone growth taking place in the ulna. Look over here in the tibia, even a small amount growing here. What happens here is we don't know the cause of Paget's disease. We think it's viral. It will stimulate bone growth to occur, and then it'll grow, it'll form, it'll grow, it'll break down, it'll start over again. The bone that grows is not strong. It is very fragile. It breaks easily. We see it in the spine, we see it in the pelvis, we see it in the femur, we see it in the tibia, and we can see it in the skull. It's a constant cycle of build up, tear down, build up, tear down. And we see it affecting the pelvic girdle right here. Look at the size of the femur. The femur on the right-hand side here, her right femur is probably twice as long as her left femur. We see the pelvic girdle is shaped, has an odd shape to it. Look at the tibia. The right tibia is normal size. The left tibia is much longer. The skull has You can see the bulge of the frontal bone here. Now, this does not affect the intellectual capabilities of your patient. It just simply affects the bone. And so we see it, we don't know what causes it. It doesn't spread to different bones. It just grows and comes back, and grows and comes back. Now, other occurrences that take place, I mentioned these the other day. We have gigantism, acromegaly, and pituitary dwarfism. Now, gigantism, the pituitary gland starts secreting excessive levels of growth hormone in childhood and continues on into adulthood. It's not unusual for an individual with gigantism to achieve a body stature of 8 feet tall. However, we do see that individuals with gigantism seem to die earlier in life than what is the norm. 50s, early 50s, maybe even early 60s would be gigantism, the extreme, the end of their lifespan. Now, acromegaly and gigantism are two different things. Acromegaly, the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary, starts secreting growth hormone again. It starts up again in adulthood after the epiphyseal plates have shut down. Full body stature has been achieved. Now the anterior pituitary starts releasing growth hormone again, and the only bones that can respond to it are the facial bones, the bones of the hands, and the bones of the feet, and they will become enlarged. They will continue to grow. Now, acromegaly usually occurs with, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Gigantism will often occur with acromegaly. A person who is experiencing gigantism will also have their facial bones enlarged along with their hands and feet. Acromegaly does not involve gigantism, though. A person can have acromegaly and be a normal stature, except for the growth of their bones in their face, their hands, and their feet. Now, the third category, pituitary dwarfism. Growth hormone was released in small quantities, if at all, during childhood. And so your individual will achieve a maximum, with pituitary dwarfism, will achieve a maximum height of about 4 feet. They will be perfectly proportioned, though. The head and the trunk and the arms and legs will all be in proportion to one another, but the individual will only be 4 feet tall because they did not receive an adequate amount of growth hormone during childhood. Now, this can be treated. An individual with pituitary dwarfism can be given synthetic growth hormone, and they will achieve their what we would consider a normal adult stature based, on genetics and stuff like, the appearance of their parents or whatever, but they can achieve a normal stature. We don't see a lot of individuals with pituitary dwarfism anymore because they can usually be treated while the bones are still growing. The growth plates will be stimulated and they will achieve their normal stature. Okay, so here we have gigantism. This individual was 8 feet 11 inches tall when he died at the age of 22. So to give you some perspective, consider the height of the adult females beside him, and that he's standing a good 4 or 5 feet above the roof line of that car. 8 feet 11 inches tall. He weighed 491 pounds. Died from an inflamed leg at age 22. So an individual with gigantism has many complications that they have to deal with. So this was apparently the tallest individual that ever lived. Now, acromegaly occur, now let me go back one here. Notice, you may not notice it. It's sort of hard to tell any changes in his facial structures on here, but remember, these bones are also being exposed to high levels of growth hormone. You'll notice how large his hands are. Now here we see acromegaly in your typical adult. Acromegaly usually starts, after it starts in adulthood, after the epiphyseal plates, the growth plates have closed. We see the hands enlarging. We see that right here. We see the face enlarging. Notice the nasal bone, the mandible, the maxilla, the frontal bone, all these get larger and larger over time. Now, this individual was a normal stature. Before he went into movies, he was a sports writer. But once his facial bones started growing like that, and his hands and feet started growing, he found a new career in movies in the 1930s and 1940s. He died, I think he was 65 when he died. So he had a longer lifespan than someone with gigantism, but he still died relatively early for his age. But you can see the malformation of the bones of the face. His hands. You look at his hands looked not unlike this, so you would see the feet becoming large too. Yeah, and this gives you a good example here. He's normal stature, but look at the size of the nape. Look at the malformation here. Of the facial bones. It affected his ability to speak. With the changes in the shape of his mandible and his maxilla and his nasal bone, he ended up having a very almost a nasal pronunciation of his words, very high-pitched sound here, but with a very definite nasal overtone, because it altered his ability to speak clearly because of our ability to make words, to form words when we speak, comes from the shape of our jaws, our mandible and our maxilla. It comes from the resonance chamber of our nasal cavity. It comes from the movement of our tongue. All this comes together to let us say words correctly. An individual with acromegaly has a very challenging time in articulating words clearly. Okay, so pituitary dwarfism. The average individual never gets above 4 feet because they're untreated. The key to identify this is that their development is proportionate. They don't have an enlarged head or an enlarged torso. They are proportionate. Now, they can be treated with synthetic growth hormone and achieve a true adult stature for them. This is most of your individuals with any kind of dwarfism here is not going to be pituitary dwarfism. Pituitary dwarfism is simply an absence of adequate amounts of growth hormone, and it's treatable. So this is a good example of pituitary dwarfism. Most of the munchkins here on the screen are pituitary dwarfs. You'll notice that they are proportionate in body size and body shape. They're all about 3 to 4 feet tall. They all, the shape of their head, their torso, their arms and legs are all proportionate to the rest of their body. That's the giveaway of pituitary dwarfism. As opposed to the more common type of dwarfism. So proportionate dwarfism is what we see with pituitary dwarfism. Body size is proportionate. They're generally no taller than 4 feet. Now, the disproportionate dwarfism is the most common type. It's a genetic issue. You have changes. You have structures that some are smaller, some are larger, some are of what we consider normal size. The achondroplastic dwarfism, you have a normal size head with short arms and short legs. What happens with achondroplastic dwarfism, the long bones stop growing. You have a normal sized torso, but the arms and legs are short. It is caused by a malformation. It is caused by a mutation on a chromosome that controls long bone growth. And it is a dominant mutation, dominant gene here. And so you get short stature, normal size head, normal torso, short arms, and short legs. So this is the most common type of dwarfism. It is caused by a mutation on chromosome 4. I almost said 5, but it's chromosome 4, which interferes with the ability of the ossification areas on the epiphyseal plates to grow properly. So your long bone growth doesn't occur. So this is as I said, genetic. This cannot be treated with growth hormone, for example. They're still about 4 feet in height, but what happens is the cartilage is never converted to bone. So you also see, in some cases, the head is enlarged. You also see that the elbows don't have the range of flexibility. These individuals are prone to heart disease. They have other issues too. You can see here's the unusual range in the elbows here, and where you see the spaces, that is where you have more hyaline cartilage than you should. Hyaline cartilage doesn't show up on X-ray. So they have a complete skeleton, but we don't have ossification taking place in here like we should. So, okay. And that is the end of our bone section. So we've looked at the various clinical conditions. We've looked at osteoporosis, osteopenia. We looked at rickets and osteomalacia. We've even seen osteomyelitis. We looked at gigantism and acromegaly. Remember, don't get those two mixed up. Gigantism is oversecretion of growth hormone starting in childhood, resulting in an individual that can be over 8 feet tall. Acromegaly occurs after adulthood, after the epiphyseal plates are closed. It only affects the bones of the face, hands, and feet. And then the two types of dwarfism: pituitary dwarfism, inadequate amounts of growth hormone during childhood, gives you a proportionate development with an individual about 4 feet tall. Chondroplastic dwarfism is a mutation on chromosome 4 that shuts down ossification of the cartilage, giving you a large head, normal torso, and short arms and legs. Okay, now let me stop sharing for a second. Are there any questions on any of this on bone? Okay. Then I want to move on to the next chapter in this unit, which will be on muscles. We'll start muscles today. And let me get, okay. So everybody should see the slide that says Chapter 9, Human Muscle Physiology. And okay, so this is a mouse, cute little mouse. The Latin term for a mouse is mus musculus. Now, the reason I show you a mouse here is not because he's cute, but he is sort of cute here, is because the term muscle came from the term for the mouse, mus musculus. early anatomists said that the movement of our muscles under our skin resembled the image of what would happen when a mouse would run under the covers on the bed. Apparently, these early anatomists had lots of mice in their house, and the mouse would get underneath the covers and it would run under the blanket, and there'd be a bulge in the blanket as the mouse went forward. And they said, oh, look, that's just like what happens in our arm. Guess they didn't have a lot of time in their hands, or that maybe they had too much time. The point is that they said that the movement of skeletal muscle looked just like a mouse. So the term, they didn't call it skeletal muscle until they said, hey, it looks like a mouse. Hence the term muscle, thanks to this little guy right here. So, okay. And that's your muscle trivia for today. Muscle tissue takes up half of our body mass. It has the ability to convert chemical energy into mechanical energy so we can do things. We take chemical energy in the form of ATP and we transform that into motion and into heat. And we have three distinct types of muscle tissue in our bodies. We have skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Muscle has unique properties and characteristics, and it has certain functions for us. So, terms. Anytime you see the term myo or mis or sarco, like sarcoplasm, like is the cytoplasm of a muscle cell. Myofilament is a muscle filament. Those terms all refer to muscles. Like osteo referred to bone, myo and sarco refer to muscles. And so we've got three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, also called voluntary muscle or striated muscle. We have cardiac muscle, found only in the heart. And we have smooth muscle, or sometimes it's referred to as involuntary muscle. Now, muscle cells that make up skeletal muscle, and we're going to spend most of our time talking about skeletal muscle, are also called muscle fibers. So if I use the term muscle fiber and muscle cell interchangeably, it's okay. That works. So, skeletal muscle tissue is the most common type of muscle in our body. They are organs, and they are attached to our bones. They're also attached to our skin. They have striations. Skeletal muscle has striations. These muscle fibers or muscle cells will run the length of the muscle. So however long the muscle is, like the gastrocnemius, for example, is a long muscle. All of its muscle cells or muscle fibers run the length of that muscle. They are voluntary muscle. We control our skeletal muscle. We do things with our skeletal muscle. So we say it's voluntary. We also say it's striated, again, because of the pattern of the within the cells. Voluntary muscle is very powerful, very, very strong contractions, but it gets tired easily. So we can apply a lot of force with skeletal muscle, but not for very long. We can apply a great deal of force at once, but we can't keep it up with skeletal muscle. So it's not a long duration, powerful structure. And as terms that describe skeletal muscle: skeletal, striated, voluntary. Cardiac muscle, conveniently found only in the heart, which is why we call it cardiac. It's also striated, but we don't describe it as just striated muscle. When we say striated muscle, we're usually just talking about skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is involuntary. We don't control the heart controls itself. The heart initiates its own contraction. You don't have any outside control on the heart telling it when to contract and when not to contract. It has its own pacemaker that starts it up. And when the heart contracts, all the cells in the heart contract as one. So the cardiac muscle, we call it cardiac. We can call it striated, but we usually don't, so we don't get confused with the skeletal muscle. And we also say involuntary. Just easier to call it cardiac muscle. And that's the only place it's located is in the heart. Now, smooth muscle. Smooth muscle does everything. It's found in all of our hollow organs, like our stomach, our bladder, our blood vessels. It surrounds all of these. It surrounds our airways. And the smooth muscle can contract and relax and open up our airway or close our airway, can open our blood vessel or close our blood vessels. It can cause our stomach to churn and help to digest food. It can squeeze food through our small intestine so that we can process it and absorb nutrients. We can squeeze our large intestine to force the undigestible material out of our bodies. And so we have all these uses for smooth muscle. We refer to it as visceral muscle. It's okay. Non-striated, that's an awkward term. Involuntary works okay. Smooth muscle is the easiest to remember. So we have skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. What do they look like? Well, skeletal muscle is striated. It has many nuclei in there. You can see all these little structures. These are all nuclei in the skeletal muscle. So it's striated and multinucleate in here. The cells are long. Cardiac muscle branches, has one nucleus per cell. It has it has structures at the point of the branchings called the gap junctions there at the what we call the intercalated disc, where we have these gap junctions to connect the cells to each other. They branch at the intercalated disc. These lines here that we see here are the intercalated disc, and we see it branches. So striations, branching, intercalated disc, single nucleus, and then we see smooth muscle, the spindle shape, one nucleus, no striations. You see where everything's located too. But regardless of the type of muscle, there are 4 characteristics that all muscle has. Muscle is excitable, meaning it will respond to stimulus. It will contract when stimulated. That's excitable. It will contract. Contraction is the second characteristic. All muscles will contract when stimulated. All muscles contract when stimulated. That's all they can do is contract. Can't do anything else. Muscles can also be stretched. We can stretch our muscles. They are extensible, so they can stretch out. And they are elastic. They will snap back to their original shape. We see this in our circulatory pattern in our bodies. We see if we can feel our arteries stretching and snapping back. We can detect the elasticity. If you take your pulse, if you place your fingers over the radial artery right behind your thumb at the end of the radius, you can feel a pounding sensation there, and that's called your pulse. And the pulse is caused by the artery wall expanding as a surge of blood goes through and then snapping back. And that is its elasticity. That is the properties of the smooth muscle surrounding the artery. It's elastic, it stretches out and then snaps back. And that snapping back is the pulse. It is equivalent to the heartbeat. You can use the pulse or the heartbeat itself, the sound of the valve shutting, to give you the heart rate. Pulse and heartbeat are two different things, but they both give you the heart rate. So what do muscles do for us? Well, they allow us to move. We can pump blood. We can manipulate our environment. We can drive a car. We can write things down. We can walk. We can talk. We can, eat something. All of that is movement. That's the first thing. The second thing is maintain our posture. Hold us upright. Hold us upright, whether we're standing or seated, or lay us down when we go to bed. We maintain our position in here. This is the second thing that it does for us. The third thing is we stabilize our joints. All of our joints are held together thanks to our muscles. The pectoral girdle, the pelvic girdle, our knee joint, all of these, for example, are held in position thanks to our muscles. They stabilize the joints and hold them together. And the fourth thing, which is very important, is they generate body heat when they contract. The body heat that we maintain at a constant temperature in our bodies of 98.6 to 37 degrees Celsius. That is, that is the heat that is lost, the energy that is lost from cellular respiration. 60% of the energy released during cellular respiration is lost as heat. The other 40% is transferred to ATP, and we get to use that. But the 60% that we don't capture is lost as heat. But that maintains our constant body temperature for us. Let's take a look at skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is an organ. It has connective tissue, it has blood vessels, it has nerves, it has living cells all throughout it. It is attached to bone. Skeletal muscle as an organ is attached to bone at both its origin and its insertion. You've learned that in lab. And it's highly innervated. Every muscle cell is in contact with a nerve. So we have a great deal of innervation here. Every muscle cell is in contact with a capillary. We have connective tissue surrounding the layers of the muscle, and we have connective tissue attaching the muscle to the various bones. So this is the anatomy of our muscle. So, as I already alluded to this, we have nervous control over every cell. Every muscle fiber is in contact with a nerve. We get lots of oxygen delivery to the muscle individual cells, and we get lots of glucose. And we take away the CO2. We remove the carbon dioxide all the time. So now, if you are a muscle, you have a lot of connective tissue surrounding you. So not only is the muscle surrounded by connective tissue, the individual cells are surrounded by connective tissue. And what this connective tissue does is it has a support function, but it also has a reinforcing function, so that when a muscle pulls on a bone, it's actually not pulling on the bone directly, it's pulling on the bone indirectly, so that all the cells can pull together. Even though they're all going to contract at the same time, we want all the cells pulling together. All the cells that are stimulated will pull together. Now, from the outside of the muscle, we have a layer of connective tissue called the epimysium. Epi means external. So the epimysium, this surrounds the entire muscle. This is what ultimately becomes the tendon that attaches the muscle to the bone. Now within the muscle proper, you have clusters of individual muscle cells. These clusters are grouped together in what are called fascicles. These are just, groups of cells, and each fascicle is surrounded by a layer of connective tissue called the perimysium. Peri means in the middle. So we have perimysium, each fascicle. Now all the fascicles form the muscle. Each fascicle is surrounded by the perimysium. The perimysium is in contact with the epimysium. And then when you go inside the fascicle, you have another layer of connective tissue that surrounds each individual muscle cell or muscle fiber. So it looks something like this. Here's a muscle cell right here. This is or muscle fiber. Now that muscle fiber is surrounded by a layer of connective tissue. That's the endomysium. So this layer here is the endomysium. This is the muscle. This is a cell right here where it says muscle fiber. That's a cell. It has a layer surrounding it of connective tissue. That is the endomysium. Now all of these muscle cells are clustered together in this group, are clustered into a fascicle. This whole thing that we see here, this larger structure, is the fascicle. The fascicle is surrounded by the perimysium. This is this outer covering here on the fascicle. This is the perimysium. The entire muscle is made up of all these this is a fascicle, that's a fascicle, that's a fascicle. These are all fascicles in here. Each fascicle is filled up with muscle cells. The entire muscle is made up of these fascicles. The muscle is surrounded by the epimysium, which forms the tendon over here. And the fascicles then are surrounded by the perimysium, and the individual cells are surrounded by the endomysium. We see it up here in on the picture. There is the perimysium surrounding the fascicle. The individual muscle cells, you can't really tell, but the endomysium surrounds each cell. And out here's the epimysium. So what it means is that when a muscle cell is stimulated to contract, that muscle cell will contract to its fullest extent when it's stimulated. It's all or nothing. It either contracts or it doesn't. So if it contracts, it will pull on its endomysium. That endomysium is continuous with the perimysium. So if this cell contracts right here, it will pull on its own endomysium as well as the perimysium surrounding that fascicle, as well as on the epimysium. Now, when a muscle contracts, when a skeletal muscle contracts, not every cell is going to contract. Only the cells that are stimulated. Not every cell contracts. Now, if a cell is stimulated, it will contract to its fullest extent. It will contract absolutely to its fullest extent. There is no partial contraction of a cell, or a 3/4 contraction of the cell, or there's no such thing as a weak contraction of a cell, of a muscle cell. The contraction of the cell is complete. It will contract to its fullest extent. How many cells the muscle brings to play determines whether it's a strong contraction of the muscle or a weak contraction of the muscle. Not every cell has to be stimulated for a muscle to contract. We alter the ability, the strength of the muscle, because we alter what we do. If you're driving, the difference between driving a nail and using your keyboard or typing on your phone, the force to drive a nail is a lot greater than the force it takes to send a text message on your phone. You're not going to be hitting your phone as hard as you hit a nail. We control how many muscle cells we use. That's why we call it voluntary muscle. Now, every cell that's stimulated will contract to its fullest extent, but it depends on how many we're using. Okay. Now, you've seen this before. Origins and insertions, that muscles are going to attach to a bone at an origin and an insertion. You can have several origins, and it will, because the origin is the bone that doesn't move, and the insertion is on the bone that does move. So, for example, the gastrocnemius muscle, its origin is on the medial and lateral condyles of the femur. Its insertion is on the calcaneus bone of the foot. The calcaneus bone can be pulled up by the gastrocnemius muscle. It can be elevated. So the calcaneus bone is the bone that moves. The femur, the medial and lateral condyles of the femur don't move. Or the sternocleidomastoid. The origin of the sternocleidomastoid is on the sternum and on the clavicle. They don't move, but they do insert on the mastoid process, which when you pull on them, our head turns. That's the insertion. So, okay, terms of importance here. A muscle fiber is a muscle cell. So we can use the term muscle fiber interchangeably with muscle cell. The cell membrane is called the sarcolemma. The cytoplasm is called the sarcoplasm. Again, we're using that sarco prefix. Skeletal muscle has lots of storage locations called glycosomes for glycogen, and has lots of myoglobin. Myoglobin is the respiratory pigment that we find in skeletal muscle that makes it bright red. Whether it's cow muscle or human muscle, it's going to be red because of the presence of myoglobin and the presence of oxygen. Meat is red. We say red meat, red beef, because of the presence of the myoglobin. When you cook meat and for example, and cook it rare, and you see a reddish fluid setting on the plate underneath the meat, that is not blood. That is the presence of myoglobin. Meat has been hung in coolers to age, and that blood has drained out. What you're seeing is the myoglobin. So, because we store oxygen in our muscles, so we can use it. We store it in the form of myoglobin. Now, within the muscle cell, we have what are known as myofibrils. Myofibrils are part of the contracting process. We also have a sarcoplasmic reticulum, just like any other endoplasmic type reticulum. It's a series of tubules. In the case of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it surrounds a section of the muscle cell, and the sarcoplasmic reticulum is packed full of calcium. We also have what are called T-tubules. T-tubules are literally tubes that extend from the surface of the muscle cell down all the way through the muscle cell, so that every contractile unit of the individual cell is in contact with a T-tubule branch. So there's a reason for that too. So what are the myofibrils? The myofibrils are rods that run the length of the individual cell. They are rods that run the length of the individual muscle cell. So these are the myofibrils. And you can have thousands of these within a cell, within each individual cell. Now, within the myofibril, you have, this is where you get the striations, the striping, the light and dark bands that we refer to as striations are found in the myofibrils. The myofibrils also form what are called sarcomeres. And they are made, the sarcomeres are made up of what are known as the myofilaments. Don't get fibrils. I know it's confusing. You have fibers, fibrils, and filaments. The myofiber is the cell. The muscle fiber is the cell. The myofibrils make up the individual cells, and the myofilaments make up the myofibrils. So the myofibril is a rod-shaped structure that runs the length of the muscle cell, of the fiber. The myofilaments make up the myofibrils. And the myofilaments are where you're going to have your contractile proteins of the muscle cell. And the myofilaments are made up of both what we call thick and thin filaments. So here is a muscle fiber. This is a muscle fiber. This is one cell you're looking at right here. One muscle cell. The outer, the cell membrane of the muscle cell is called the sarcolemma. The cytoplasm would be called the sarcoplasm. Within this muscle cell, you have thousands of these myofibrils running the length of the cell. If the cell is 2 feet long, the myofibrils run 2 feet. Like if we have the gastrocnemius muscle, for example, that is about 18 inches long, then all the cells are 18 inches long, and all of the myofibrils in all the cells are 18 inches long in length. That's the myofibril. So you have thousands and thousands of myofibrils inside each muscle cell. And you'll notice that the myofibril has both light bands and dark bands present here. You see the striations are present. The striations start showing up in skeletal muscle in the myofibrils. So these rods that run the length of the muscle are where we're starting to see these stripes. We see light bands and we see dark bands in here, and they give us the appearance of stripes. The striations form from light and dark bands. They run the length of the myofibril. The light and dark bands run the length of the myofibril, and the myofibril runs the length of the muscle cell. Now we've named these bands. We have what are known as the A bands. These are the dark areas, the dark regions. The dark bands are the A bands. The light bands are called the I bands. So the A bands are the dark areas. The I bands are the light areas. And so you can see now within those lines, within the light band and dark band, so we see the A band. In the middle of the A band is an area called the H zone. That's a light area that you see in the middle, and it doesn't show up well in this picture here. You also have an M line. I'll show you that in a better picture. In fact, I can only show you the A band and the I band. A band is dark, I band is light. So let's go take a look here. What are we seeing? The myofilaments that make up the myofibril are the protein actin and the protein myosin. actin is referred to as the thin filaments. They form, the actin forms the light band. The actin forms the I band. The myosin is the thick filament, and the myosin makes the dark band. It runs across the entire A band is made of myosin. So the light band, the I band is actin, the A band, the dark band is myosin. So we go back here and take a look at this picture here. So this dark band is all myosin. The light band is actin. So the A band is myosin. The I band is actin. Actin is the thin filament. Myosin is the thick filament. So, and if we look at this broken down, here we can see a thin filament. The thin filaments are these little yellow things here. These little yellow proteins are the actin. This is the myosin. This is a thick filament. This is the thin filament. The I band is thin filaments only. The H zone is thick filaments only. So this is the I band. This is the H zone here and here. And the A band is this whole dark area in here. So this is the A band here, and the I band is out here. Thick filaments make the A band, thin filaments make the I band. Now, the thin filaments are attached to another structure. Now I can show it to you here. It's called the Z line or Z disc. These actins that are attached to the myosin. So there's an actin attached to a myosin. There's an actin attached to a myosin. The actins are attached to other actins in areas adjacent to them. And they are connected to these other actins at an area called the Z line. Even though it says Z disc, it's really the Z line. So here we see these blue lines here are the actins. The blue lines are the actins. The red thick lines are the myosin. The actins are above the myosins. Let me make sure I didn't steer you wrong. This yellow band here, I spoke it incorrectly. That is not the actin. The actin is the blue. I was focusing on the wrong thing here. So the thin filament is blue. The thick filament is red. This is actin. Actin is above and below each of the myosins. The actins connect to other actins next to it on either end of the structure. This is one contractile unit that you see right here with actins and myosins, actins and myosins. The Z line is the junction between another unit just like it this way and another unit just like it this way. The Z line or Z disc is the connection from unit to unit to unit. The actins all connect to each other. The myosins are held in the middle. This is what skeletal muscle looks like at the microscopic level. So now this one is a pretty good illustration here. Here is your I band right there, the light area. When you look at a slide, a microscope slide of a muscle cell, a skeletal muscle, you're going to see the light area and the dark area. This is the light area. This is the Z line right in the middle, but that is the I band. The A band is the dark area. The A band is the dark area. So you have the I band, the A band, and another I band. In the middle of each I band, you have a Z line. The Z line is where the actins connect to each other. Because you'll notice that the actins in this particular area here, called a sarcomere, A sarcomere is the contractile unit of the muscle cell. The sarcomere is the contractile unit of the muscle cell. And it goes from Z line to Z line. Every one of these structures along here is a sarcomere. There's one, there's one to the right and one to the left. Each sarcomere extends from its own Z line to Z line. The actins of all the sarcomeres connect to each other at the Z line. See, like they're connected down here, and then we're connected again and again. So when a sarcomere, when a muscle cell contracts, every sarcomere in every myofibril contracts together. So the whole cell contracts. This is the contracting unit of a muscle cell right here. And when a muscle cell contracts, every one of these sarcomeres will shrink together, will come together. When a muscle cell contracts, every myofibril in that cell will contract. There's no partial contraction, there's no sort of contraction. It's all or none. It either contracts or it doesn't. So the sarcomere is made up of the thin filaments that overlap the thick filaments. Where we only have thin filaments, we have the light area, that's the I band. When we have the dark band, we have the thick filaments. The thick filaments are myosin, the thin filaments are actin. Yeah. So this is what myosin looks like. Each thick filament consists of about 300 or 400 myosin molecules together. Each myosin molecule has two heads. They look like drivers on a golf club. They form the heads attach. The tails come together to form the myosin, the thick filament, with the myosin heads sticking out. You can see here's our thick filament. These are all myosin heads here. Each individual molecule is made of all these myofilaments woven together. So all the tails form the thick filament with all the heads sticking out. Now there is a binding site on each of the myosin molecules, on each head, because these heads ultimately are going to be able to reach up and grab onto the actin and give it a good yank. And you're going to hear a lot about that again and again and again. So this is what the thick filament looks like. About 300 or 400 myosin molecules come together to make each thick filament. And we got lots and lots and lots of thick filaments in every muscle cell. That's a technical term, lots. Now the thin filament is made up of the protein actin. The thick filament was made of the protein myosin. This is the protein actin. Now, it looks like a double helix. In here, looks like blueberries, actually. It is a double helix of actin, and woven in through the actin are two other proteins, one called tropomyosin and one called troponin. On the illustration here, tropomyosin is a long strand that's woven through the double helix of the actins, and it blocks their binding sites because the myosin heads want to reach up and grab onto the actin. Well, the binding sites for the myosin heads are blocked by the tropomyosin. Embedded into the tropomyosin is another protein called troponin. Troponin, when it's stimulated, will actually roll over. And when it rolls over, it will drag the tropomyosin out of the way, exposing the binding sites. So we don't do anything simply. Anyway, So the thin filament is a double helix of actin with tropomyosin and troponin woven in the middle of it. So other proteins that we find in here, in the myofilaments, we have a protein called titin. It's elastic. It's an elastic filament. It holds the thick filaments in place. It is found in the myosin, so it holds the thick filaments in place, and it keeps them from getting stretched too much. So the titin is very important to us. The next protein is called dystrophin. Dystrophin works with the thin filaments. The thin filaments are tied to the cell membrane with the dystrophin, the sarcolemma, the cell membrane. So we use the dystrophin protein to hold the actins to the sarcolemma itself. Okay, now, problems. This is the first of our clinical problems with muscles. Muscular dystrophy, called Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. This is the most common type of any of the muscular dystrophies. There's more than just one that will occur in childhood. It is a sex-linked disorder. It shows up in males almost all the time. It is usually passed on by the mother. So in addition to all the other things our mothers give us, like male pattern baldness and red-green color blindness and things like that, the female maternal X gene also carries muscular dystrophy. So what happens here is that it causes the link between, it causes the dystrophin link between the sarcolemma and the actins to break down. And so we don't get good connection between the cell membrane and the actin. And so when the myosin tries to reach up and grab onto the actin to allow the muscle to contract, it doesn't work right. It tears the cell membrane because you're not anchored correctly to the cell membrane. So you're pulling on the actin, and the actin slides over the myosin, but it tears the cell membrane. Calcium comes in here, it damages the actin, it damages the myosin. The muscle cells initiate apoptosis, and your patient dies by about 30 years of age, usually from respiratory failure. So again, it's a genetic disorder. So, and it is probably the most well-known of any of the muscular dystrophies that are out there. So, okay. Another term here, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. I mentioned this earlier. It is endoplasmic reticulum, means it's a series of hollow tubes that surround each myofibril. It runs the length of the myofibril. These tubes run the length of the myofibril. They are packed with calcium. They surround each sarcomere of every myofibril in the muscle cell. And they have cisterns at the ends. So they're like tubes of calcium with cisterns on each, at the end of each sarcomere, and they contain high levels of calcium. So this is what the sarcoplasmic reticulum does in our skeletal muscle. It stores lots of calcium because we need lots of calcium so that we can contract our muscles. Now, we have the sarcomeres. Remember, the sarcomeres are the contracting units. At the end of each sarcomere is a T-tubule. The T-tubule is a tube that projects down from the surface of the cell membrane, from the sarcolemma down into the ends of each sarcomere in that cell. Muscle cell is made up of thousands and thousands of myofibrils. each myofibril has thousands and thousands of sarcomeres formed by the myofilaments. On each end of the sarcomere is a T-tubule, and it projects down into all the way through the entire cell. It increases the surface area of the muscle cell. Each cell alone, they're all going to have these. Every cell is going to have T-tubules extending down to the sarcomeres. Okay. Now, the tubules are located in the adjacent to each of the cisterns, the storage tanks of calcium on each end of the sarcomere. And we call it a triad. We have a T-tubule with a cistern on each side of it. And it looks something like this. There's a T-tubule right there. This is Sarcoplasmic Reticulum in blue, and this is a cistern, a storage area for on either side of the T-tubule. So every sarcomere in every myofibril is going to have this structure. Myofibrils, we can see the sarcomeres are the contracting unit, and every myofibril within, this is a cell here. What we're seeing is a portion of a cell. So this is a myofibril right here. There's another one, another one, another one. Every sarcomere is surrounded by a set of sarcoplasmic reticulum with T-tubules on each end. These T-tubules extend all the way to the surface of the cell membrane. And so what we've done is we've increased the surface area of the muscle cell dramatically. So, okay, this actually, it looks like a good place to stop and see how far we've gotten. Let's see, lab this afternoon. I would like to start taking a look at the nervous system today. Does anybody want to take their lab test on ground? Because I can do that today if you want. Or we can just go on and do new content. We can start taking a look at the nervous system. Because we're at the point now where we will be done with lab by the middle of April. I'd like to get this done for everybody. So, questions, comments, thoughts, concerns? So, okay, if there's no concerns about it, then let's go ahead and plan on doing lab this afternoon. Your lab test should have opened up on Saturday, and it should be open for a whole week. That would be the bone test. If hopefully we won't have any more e-learn issues. Your lecture test should have ended this weekend, and the lab, if you had an issue with the lecture test, let me know. I can fix that for you and give you access. Your lab test, you have all week to take that. So, but I would like to go ahead and get started on the nervous system today in lab. So, unless anybody has any comments, I'm going to pull the plug and get us out of here. So, okay, then I will see you in lab.